Content warning. This story contains adult themes and romantic content between characters 18 plus. The Vampire King had forgotten what silence felt like until the woman with the coffee-stained sleeve sat down across from him and said, "You look like someone who won't remember my face tomorrow, which makes you perfect." Mordecai Yavalon had lived 3,217 years, ruled the Eternal Court for the last millennium, and survived 14 assassination attempts by rival houses who wanted his throne. He had walked through the fall of empires, watched civilizations rise and crumble like sandcastles against the tide, and learned to wear indifference like armor. Yet, sitting in this fluorescent-lit diner at 3 in the morning, disguised in ordinary human clothes, with glamour softening his too pale skin and too white hair into something forgettable, he found himself utterly unprepared for the exhausted honesty in a stranger's voice. She was perhaps 26 or 27 in human years, with dark circles under hazel eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying invisible weight. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a gray sweater that had seen better days. Everything about her screamed ordinary, forgettable, the kind of human who moved through the world without leaving ripples. Mordecai had chosen this particular diner precisely because it attracted such people. The Golden Hour Cafe, open 24 hours, positioned between 2 train stations in a city that never quite slept, but never fully woke either. He came here when the weight of immortality pressed too heavily on his chest, when the grand halls of his underground court felt suffocating despite their vastness, when he needed to sit among the living and remember what it felt like to exist in the present tense rather than the eternal. He never spoke to anyone, never engaged. That was his rule, forged over centuries of careful separation between his world and theirs. But this woman did not wait for his permission. "I'm Hazel Price," she said, wrapping both hands around a coffee mug that steamed between them. "And I have 4 hours until my train leaves for a city where I don't know anyone, to start a job I'm not qualified for, because staying where I was would have killed something important in me. So I'm going to tell you everything, and you're going to sit there with your black coffee and your sad, mysterious eyes, and tomorrow neither of us will remember this happened." Mordecai opened his mouth, though he had no idea what words would have emerged. She did not give him the chance. "I grew up in a town so small it didn't have a traffic light," Hazel began, and her voice carried the cadence of someone who had been holding words inside for too long. "The kind of place where everyone knows your grandmother's maiden name and your third-grade teacher, and exactly how much your father drank before he left. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep our house, which was really just a rental with broken heating, and a landlord who showed up drunk on Christmas Eve to collect rent early. She died when I was 19. Aneurysm. She was folding laundry one moment and gone the next, and I found her between the fitted sheets and the pillowcases." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A tired waitress refilled coffee for a trucker 3 booths down. The world continued its mechanical rotation, indifferent to the grief being excavated across a laminate table. Mordecai, who had long ago numbed himself to human suffering as a matter of survival, felt something shift beneath his ribs. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition, as though this stranger had reached into his chest and touched something he had forgotten existed. "Everyone said I was so strong," Hazel continued, her fingers tightening around the mug. "So composed at the funeral, so responsible with the arrangements. What they meant was I didn't cry where they could see. I didn't make them uncomfortable with my grief. I packaged it neatly and smiled when they brought casseroles and said she was in a better place, as if being dead was somehow superior to being alive with a daughter who loved her." She took a long drink of her coffee, grimaced at the temperature, continued anyway. "I stayed in that town because I didn't know how to leave. Got a job at the library, which paid nothing but felt safe. Dated a man named Tom for 3 years because he was there and he was nice, and everyone said we made sense together. He proposed last month in front of his entire family at Sunday dinner, and I said yes because saying no would have required explaining that I felt nothing. Not love, not even strong dislike. Just a vast gray nothing, like I was already a ghost haunting my own life." Mordecai knew about being a ghost in one's own existence. He had perfected the art over centuries, moving through his court with perfect posture and empty eyes, making decisions that affected thousands while feeling nothing about any of it. He attended councils and balls, presided over blood trials and territorial disputes, smiled with sharp teeth at enemies and allies alike, all while a hollow space where something vital used to be simply ached with a pain so old it had become normal. "I gave the ring back 2 weeks ago," Hazel said. "Packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Applied for jobs in cities I'd never visited. Picked the first one that said yes. My best friend Sarah said I was running away, and she was right, but she said it like running was cowardly. I think running takes more courage than staying somewhere that's slowly erasing you, don't you think?" She looked directly at him then, really looked, and Mordecai realized with a start that she expected an answer. No one had asked his opinion on anything personal in decades. His court sought his judgments, his commands, his strategic mind. No one wondered what he thought about the small human act of choosing your own life over comfortable death. "Yes," he heard himself say, and his voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by disuse in matters that mattered. Running toward something is different than running away. The direction is what transforms cowardice into courage. Hazel blinked, then smiled, and it was a real smile, not the polite mask people wore in public. "Exactly. Thank you. Everyone's been making me feel selfish for choosing myself for once." The waitress appeared with a coffee pot, topped off Hazel's mug without asking, glanced at Mordecai's still full cup with mild disapproval, and disappeared again. The diner held perhaps 7 other people, each isolated in their own booth, their own private middle-of-the-night crisis or contemplation. Mordecai had been coming here for 6 months, ever since he had stumbled upon it after a particularly tedious council session where 3 different factions had argued for 4 hours about blood territory rights in the northeastern quadrant. He should have been in his chambers beneath the city, in the sprawling complex of marble halls and ancient stone where the Eternal Court had made its home for the last 3 centuries. Instead, he had walked, glamored into invisibility, through the human city above until the sun began threatening the horizon, and he needed shelter. The golden hour had been there, bright and mundane and blessedly mortal. Now he sat here once a week, sometimes twice, always in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, always alone, always silent. He watched humans live their small, brief lives and tried to remember what it felt like to want something beyond the next century's survival. "I'm scared," Hazel admitted quietly, and the confession seemed to cost her something. "Terrified, actually. The city I'm moving to is huge. The job is with a tech startup that could fold in 6 months. I don't have enough savings to last if things go wrong. I'll be living with 2 roommates I found on the internet who could turn out to be serial killers. Every logical part of my brain is screaming that I'm making a catastrophic mistake." "But you are going anyway," Mordecai said, and it was not a question. "But I'm going anyway," she agreed, "because the alternative is going back to that town, to that life, to that gray nothing feeling, and I would rather fail spectacularly doing something brave than succeed at slowly disappearing." She said it with such fierce conviction that Mordecai felt the words land in his chest like stones thrown into still water. When had he last done anything brave? When had he last chosen discomfort over the familiar emptiness? He ruled the most powerful vampire court in the Western Hemisphere, commanded respect and fear from beings who had walked the earth for millennia. And yet he sat in this diner week after week like a ghost seeking warmth from the living, because he could not remember how to feel alive himself. Hazel launched into another story, this one about her brief stint in community college where she had studied art history before financial reality forced her into practical pursuits. She talked about her favorite painting, The Death of Sardanapalus by Delacroix, which she had only ever seen in textbooks, but which haunted her with its beautiful violence and doomed decadence. She talked about her 7th grade English teacher, who told her she wrote like someone trying to prove they deserved to exist. She talked about the time she stole her mother's car at 16 to drive 3 hours to the ocean because she needed to know what infinity looked like. The words poured out like water from a broken dam, and Mordecai sat transfixed, speaking only occasionally when she paused for breath or asked his thoughts on whether people could really change their fundamental nature, or if growth was just learning to hide your worst parts better. "I think," he said slowly, "that change is possible only if you have a reason to endure the violence of transformation. Most people lack sufficient reason." What would be sufficient reason? Hazel asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Mordecai thought about the question. Once, many human lifetimes ago, he had believed in things like honor and justice and the protection of his people. He had taken the throne during a period of chaos, when the vampire courts had been fractured and warring, when old laws had broken down and young vampires ran wild through human populations, drawing attention and risking exposure. He had united them through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless force, had established the eternal court and the blood accords that governed their kind, had built something that lasted. Somewhere along the way, purpose had calcified into duty, and duty into habit, and habit into the emptiness that now filled his nights. "I do not know any more," he admitted, and the honesty felt dangerous. Hazel studied him with those tired, too knowing eyes. "You're sad," she observed, "like, deeply sad. I could tell from across the diner. That's why I sat here. Everyone else looked lonely or tired or angry. You just looked endlessly sad, like you'd forgotten how to be anything else." No one had perceived him so clearly in centuries. Mordecai kept his expression carefully neutral, but something must have shown because Hazel reached across the table and touched his hand where it rested beside his coffee cup. Her skin was warm, alive. The pulse point in her wrist beat steadily, and he could hear her heart, smell the blood moving through her veins, feel the electric warmth of mortal life against his death-cold flesh. He should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance he had carefully cultivated. Instead, he sat frozen, transfixed by the simple human gesture of comfort. "Sorry," Hazel said, withdrawing her hand after a moment. "That was presumptuous. I'm treating you like a therapist when you're just a sad stranger in a diner at 3 a.m. 3:47, Mordecai corrected automatically, then wanted to retract the pedantic observation. But Hazel laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes. 3:47. Time's moving too fast. I feel like I just sat down and now my train leaves in 2 hours and 13 minutes. She told him more. About her complicated relationship with her younger brother, who had joined the military to escape the same small-town suffocation, but now sent her emails full of conservative talking points that felt like a stranger had stolen his voice. About her cat, Mr. Darcy, who had died 3 months ago and whom she still expected to find sleeping in sunbeams. About the recurring dream she had where she could fly but only 3 feet off the ground, which felt like a metaphor for her entire existence. Mordecai contributed his own thoughts carefully, revealing nothing concrete about himself, but offering the kind of conversation he imagined she needed. He told her that family often grew apart, not because love ended, but because growth happened at different speeds in different directions. He said grief had no timeline, and she should let herself miss her cat without shame. He suggested that flying 3 feet off the ground was still flying, and perhaps the dream was telling her that small elevations were still escapes. They talked about music and books and the strange intimacy of late-night conversations with strangers. Hazel confessed she had once stolen a lipstick from a department store just to prove to herself she could do something wrong without the world ending. Mordecai, in a moment of recklessness, told her he understood the impulse toward meaningless transgression when virtue became suffocating. The diner gradually emptied until they were the only customers remaining. The waitress cleaned the already clean counter and shot them occasional glances that suggested their time was running out. Through the wide windows, the darkness had begun thinning into the gray that preceded dawn. Mordecai felt panic rise in his chest. The sun would break the horizon in less than an hour. He needed to return to his sanctum, to the safety of his underground chambers, but leaving felt impossible, as though this conversation had cracked something open inside him that could not be sealed again. "I should get to the station," Hazel said reluctantly, checking her phone. "My train board's in 40 minutes. "Where are you going?" Mordecai asked, hating the desperate edge in his voice. "Seattle. The job's with a small tech company that does data visualization. I'll be doing customer support and administrative work, which sounds boring, but pays enough to survive. What about you? Do you live here?" She meant the city, but the question felt larger. Did he live anywhere? He existed, he endured, he ruled, but living seemed to require something he had lost track of centuries ago. "Yes," he said simply. "I have responsibilities here." "Heavy ones from the sound of it," Hazel observed. She stood, shouldering her backpack and gathering her coat. Thank you for this, for listening, for making me feel less crazy about upending my entire life on a feeling. She pulled out her wallet, but Mordecai shook his head. Allowed me, he said. You didn't have anything except coffee. Nevertheless, Hazel smiled. Mysterious and chivalrous, you're like something out of a Gothic novel. If I didn't have a train to catch, I'd ask for your name. She said it lightly, already turning toward the door, already moving into her new life and away from this brief connection. Mordecai watched her go, felt the emptiness in the booth spread like ice water through his veins, and realized with sudden sharp clarity that he had been lonely for so long he had forgotten it was lonely, had mistaken the ache for normalcy rather than the symptom of something vital missing. The diner door chimed as she pushed through it. Through the window, he watched her walk toward the street, toward the train station, toward a future that did not include him. For 3,000 years, Mordecai had followed rules, his rules, ironclad and inviolate, designed to keep his world and the human world separate, to maintain control, to prevent the kind of dangerous entanglement that led to exposure or weakness or the terrible vulnerability of caring about something as fragile as mortal life. He had never broken those rules, never even bent them. But sitting in that empty diner as the first gray light of dawn began poisoning the sky, watching a stranger disappear into her own life, Mordecai understood with cold certainty that he could not let her vanish. Not yet. Not when she had somehow reached into his chest and reminded him what it felt like to want something beyond the next century's survival. He left money on the table, far too much, and walked out into the morning that would soon kill him if he did not find shelter. His phone, an expensive modern thing he barely used, came out of his pocket. He made 3 calls, the first to his second in command, Lyric, who answered with military efficiency despite the hour. The second to a vampire who ran a network of information brokers and owed him considerable favors. The third to his driver, who knew better than to ask questions. Mordecai did not follow Hazel Price to the train station that morning. He went home to his sanctum, to his vast chambers beneath the city, and he did something he had not done in decades. He sat at his desk as the sun rose above ground, pulled out paper and pen, and wrote down everything he could remember about the conversation. Every story she had told, every expression that had crossed her face, every moment when her voice had cracked with emotion or rung with determination. Then he gave orders that would fundamentally alter the careful distance he had maintained from the human world for centuries. He would see Hazel Price again, and again, and again, until he understood why 4 hours in a diner had managed to crack the ice that had encased his chest for longer than most civilizations had existed. His court would think him mad. His advisors would counsel against this recklessness. His enemies would see it as weakness to exploit. Mordecai, king of the eternal court, found he did not care. For the first time in a millennium, he wanted something beyond mere existence. He wanted to know what happened next in the life of a woman brave enough to choose uncertainty over comfortable death. He wanted to hear more stories, wanted to offer more thoughts, wanted to sit across from someone who saw his sadness and did not flinch away. He wanted, and the wanting hurt like coming back to life after a long, cold death. 3 days later, Hazel Price emerged from her new job at exactly 5:30 in the evening, exhausted but upright. She stopped at a coffee shop 2 blocks from her office, the kind of place with exposed brick and aggressively quirky decor. She ordered something complicated with oat milk and extra espresso shots. Mordecai was already sitting in the corner, disguised in modern clothes, with his glamour carefully calibrated to make him seem human, but distinctive enough that she might recognize him. His white hair appeared dark blonde, his corpse-pale skin now tan, his red-tinged eyes now a human brown. He pretended to read a book, though his attention fixed entirely on the door. When Hazel walked in, wind-blown and distracted, scrolling on her phone, Mordecai felt his dead heart skip in a way that should have been physiologically impossible. She did not notice him at first. She got her coffee, found a small table by the window, pulled out a laptop that had seen better days, and started working with the intense focus of someone running on determination and caffeine. Mordecai waited exactly 14 minutes, then stood and approached her table as though the meeting were coincidence. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "You are the woman from the diner. The golden hour, 3 nights ago." Hazel looked up, and her eyes widened with recognition and surprise. "Oh my God, sad stranger guy, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I did not expect to see you either," Mordecai lied smoothly. "You said you were leaving the city." "I did leave. I left my old city. This is my new city." "Wait, you live here? In Seattle?" Hazel's expression shifted from surprise to delight. "What are the odds?" Astronomical, if it had actually been coincidence. Mordecai had pulled considerable strings to make this meeting appear natural. His information broker had provided Hazel's new address, her work location, her daily routines. He had learned the name of her roommates, the make of her used car, the fact that she stopped at this particular coffee shop 3 times a week. Some distant part of him recognized this as stalking, as a profound violation of her privacy and autonomy. But he was a 3,000-year-old vampire king, accustomed to getting what he wanted, and what he wanted was to see her again without frightening her away. "May I join you?" he asked. Hazel hesitated for only a second before nodding and gesturing to the empty chair. "Sure. Though I should warn you, I'm in a weird mood. First week at a new job is always awkward, and I'm discovering that tech startup culture is even stranger than advertised." Mordecai sat, folded his hands on the table, and said, "Tell me." So she did. She told him about her co-workers, about the CEO who held meetings on treadmills, about the strange territorial politics of the office kitchen, about the work itself, which was boring but manageable. She asked about his life, and Mordecai offered carefully constructed truths that revealed nothing material. He said he worked in estate management, which was not entirely false. He said he had family obligations that kept him in the city. He said he preferred nights to days, old things to new things, silence to noise, all true in their way. They talked for an hour before Hazel had to leave for a dinner with her roommates. As she packed her laptop, she paused and said, "This is going to sound weird, but would you want to exchange numbers? I don't know anyone here yet, and you're a really good listener. Plus, you're the only person in the city who knows anything about my old life, which feels significant somehow." Mordecai gave her his number, a private line that no one from his court had access to. That night, she texted him a photo of her dinner, a disastrous attempt at homemade pasta with the caption, "New city, same terrible cooking skills." He did not know how to respond to such casual intimacy, so he simply wrote back, "The effort is commendable regardless of the outcome." She sent back a laughing emoji and a good night. Mordecai stared at his phone screen for 20 minutes, transfixed by this tiny window into her life. They fell into a pattern over the following weeks. Mordecai arranged coincidental meetings at the coffee shop, at a bookstore she frequented, at a late-night diner similar to the Golden Hour, where she sometimes went when she could not sleep. Each time, Hazel seemed genuinely delighted to see him, and each time, they talked for hours. She told him about her struggles with her new life, the homesickness that hit at unexpected moments, the small victories and daily frustrations. He listened with the intensity of someone who had forgotten how to care about anything and was now remembering through her eyes. Mordecai also began rearranging his life to accommodate these meetings. He delegated more to Lyric, his second-in-command, a fierce vampire woman who had served him for 400 years and who watched his recent behavior with barely concealed concern. He skipped council sessions for the first time in decades. He stopped attending the elaborate social functions that were part of court politics. His advisors worried. His rivals sensed distraction. But Mordecai, for the first time in a millennium, felt something other than the gray emptiness that had consumed him. He felt anticipation, curiosity, the strange, painful joy of knowing he would see her again soon. One evening, 6 weeks after their first meeting at the Golden Hour, Hazel invited him to a gallery opening. One of her roommates worked in arts administration and had free tickets. "It's probably terrible," Hazel said over text, "but there will be free wine and cheese, and I'm trying to do the thing where I have experiences instead of just working and sleeping." Mordecai knew gallery openings. He had attended hundreds over the centuries, had commissioned art and collected pieces that now sat in museums under false provenance. But he agreed immediately, because saying no meant not seeing her, and not seeing her had become unbearable. The gallery was in a converted warehouse, the art aggressively modern and mostly incomprehensible. Hazel wore a green dress that brought out the color in her eyes, and she moved through the space with a mix of genuine interest and self-aware irony making quiet observations about the pieces that were smarter than anything the artist's statement provided. Mordecai stayed close, hyper-aware of her warmth in the crowded room, of the way people looked at her and smiled, of how easily she laughed. She introduced him to her roommate, a woman named Jennifer, who studied him with open curiosity, and later pulled Hazel aside for a whispered conversation that ended with both of them glancing his direction. "Jennifer thinks you're either a serial killer or secretly in love with me," Hazel announced when she returned, her cheeks slightly flushed from wine. "I told her you're just weird and nice, which is my favorite combination in people." "I am not a serial killer," Mordecai said, which was technically true. He had killed, certainly, but never serially and rarely without significant political justification. "That's exactly what a serial killer would say," Hazel teased. She was standing close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, could hear the wine-quickened beat of her heart. "You're weird, though, right? Like, you have to know you give off a very mysterious, possibly dangerous, definitely not emotionally available vibe." "I am not dangerous to you," Mordecai said, and meant it absolutely. He would raise cities before allowing harm to come to her. "But you are emotionally unavailable?" "I am trying to be available." The words emerged raw, honest in a way that made him feel exposed. "It has been a very long time since I allowed myself to care about anything. I am out of practice." Hazel's expression softened. She touched his arm, her fingers warm through the fabric of his jacket. "I get that. After my mom died, I locked everything down for years because feeling anything hurt too much. It's brave to try again." She did not know she was describing his experience exactly. Did not know that he had been emotionally locked down not for years but for centuries, that meeting her had been like someone breaking into a tomb and letting in air and light for the first time in ages. They left the gallery together, walked through the city streets as the night deepened. Seattle's eternal mist hung in the air, softening the sharp edges of buildings and streetlights. Hazel talked about her dreams, the life she was trying to build, the person she hoped to become. Mordecai walked beside her and realized he was happy, not content, not satisfied, not merely less miserable. Actually happy in the uncomplicated way he had not experienced since he was young and mortal and everything still felt possible. It terrified him. When they reached her apartment building, Hazel turned to face him under the soft glow of the entrance light. "Thank you for coming tonight. I know art openings aren't everyone's thing." "I enjoyed it," Mordecai said. "I enjoy spending time with you." "I enjoy spending time with you too." She smiled, then rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and warm. "Good night, mysterious stranger. Text me when you get home safe." She disappeared into the building, leaving Mordecai standing on the sidewalk with his hand pressed to his cheek where her lips had touched, feeling like a fool and not caring. He texted her when he returned to his sanctum. She sent back a heart emoji. Lyric found him in his study an hour later, staring at his phone like it contained divine revelation. "My lord," she said carefully. Lyric was tall and severe, with the white hair and crimson eyes of their kind, undisguised in the privacy of court. She had fought beside him in the territorial wars, had helped him build the eternal court from chaos and bloodshed. She knew him better than anyone living. "We need to discuss your recent absences." "Not now," Mordecai said without looking up. 3 council members have filed formal complaints. The border dispute with the Eastern Court requires your attention, and there are rumors circulating about your behavior." "What rumors?" He finally met her eyes. Lyric's expression was troubled. "That you have taken a mortal lover, that you are compromised, that you are distracted from your duties as king." "I am not compromised. With respect, my lord, you have missed 4 council sessions in 6 weeks. You have delegated treaty negotiations that you have always personally overseen. You disappear for hours without explanation or guard. This is not like you." Mordecai set his phone down and stood. "Perhaps I am tired of being like myself. Perhaps a millennium of being exactly what everyone expects is long enough. You are being reckless." "I am being alive." The words came out sharp. "Do you remember what that feels like?" "Lyric? To want something beyond the next century's political maneuvering? To care about anything more than territory and blood rights and the endless, tedious management of immortal existence?" Lyric's jaw tightened. "I remember mortality vaguely. I remember that it ends. I remembered that attachments to mortals end in grief. Then at least it ends in feeling something. They stared at each other across the study, centuries of partnership straining against this new, dangerous variable in Mordecai's carefully ordered life. Finally, Lyric sighed. What is her name? Hazel Price. Does she know what you are? No. Does she know your real name? Mordecai hesitated. He had introduced himself as Marcus, a name close enough to his real one that he would respond naturally. More lies, more deception, more carefully managed manipulation of the woman who had shown him nothing but honest vulnerability. I call myself Marcus with her, he admitted. This cannot end well, my lord. I am aware. Yet you persist. I persist. Lyric studied him for a long moment. I have served you for 400 years. I have never seen you happy. You look happy now, and terrified, and more human than I have witnessed in all our time together. I do not know if this is wisdom or folly. Neither do I, Mordecai admitted, but I am going to see it through regardless. His second-in-command nodded slowly. Then I will manage the court in your absence as much as possible. But my lord, you cannot hide forever. Eventually, she will learn what you are. Eventually, you will have to choose between her world and ours. Lyric left him alone with that truth. Mordecai knew she was right. The deception was unsustainable. But he could not bring himself to stop, could not bear the thought of Hazel looking at him with fear or disgust instead of the open warmth he had come to crave like blood. So he continued the careful dance, meeting her several times a week, learning the shape of her life, slowly letting her learn carefully edited pieces of his. 2 months after their first meeting, Hazel asked him about his family. They were at the late-night diner again, their usual booth, coffee and pie. Neither of them were really eating. The question came casually, but Mordecai heard the deeper inquiry beneath it. She wanted to know him, wanted to understand the sadness she had identified that first night. I have no living family, he said, which was true. Everyone he had known from his mortal life was 3,000 years dead. I'm sorry, that must be lonely. It has been. He met her eyes. Less so recently. Hazel smiled, a bit shy, a bit pleased. They had been dancing around the obvious attraction for weeks now, neither quite willing to name it. She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. Her skin was so warm, so impossibly alive. I like you, Marcus, she said quietly. Really like you. Which is terrifying because I moved here specifically to figure out who I am without defining myself through relationships. But I can't seem to help it. You make me feel less alone in the world. Mordecai looked at their joined hands and felt the chasm opening beneath him. This was the moment to tell her the truth. This was the moment to stop the deception before it went further. This was the moment to choose honor over desire. I like you as well, he said instead, and tightened his grip on her hand. More than I have words to explain. She kissed him that night in the parking lot outside the diner, under a sky too clouded to show stars. Her lips were soft and her body warm against his cold one, and Mordecai kissed her back with centuries of loneliness pouring through him like a dam breaking. When they finally pulled apart, Hazel was breathless and smiling. I've wanted to do that for weeks. As have I. You're freezing, she observed, rubbing his arms. Do you have a circulation problem? Should I be concerned? I run cold, Mordecai said, another truth that was also a lie. Always have. They began officially dating by human terms, dinners and movies and long walks through the city. Mordecai navigated the relationship with the careful strategy he usually reserved for court politics, always leaving before dawn, always arranging dates in the evening, always wearing the glamour that made him seem human. Hazel integrated him into her new life. He met her roommates properly, endured their obvious scrutiny. He attended a birthday party for one of her co-workers, made small talk about human concerns he barely understood. He listened to her talk about her hopes and fears, her past and her imagined future, and fell deeper into something he had thought himself incapable of feeling. He was in love with her, desperately, dangerously in love, in a way that made him reckless and stupid and more vulnerable than he had been in 1,000 years. His court noticed. How could they not? Their king was distracted, delegating authority, disappearing for nights at a time. Rivals sensed weakness. The Eastern Court began testing boundaries, pushing into territories that had been settled for decades. Problems arose that required his attention, and Mordecai found himself resentful of the intrusion into his time with Hazel. Lyric confronted him again after he missed a crucial negotiation session with a neighboring court. "This has gone too far," she said bluntly. "You are neglecting your responsibilities. The court is destabilizing. Your enemies are emboldened. And for what? A mortal woman who does not even know your real name?" "Watch your tone," Mordecai said coldly. "I have earned the right to speak plainly." Lyric's eyes flashed. "You are my king and my friend, and I am watching you unravel over a relationship built entirely on deception. What is your endgame here, Mordecai? Do you plan to turn her, to bring her into our world?" The question hit like a physical blow. He had not allowed himself to think that far ahead, had been living night to night, stolen moment to stolen moment. Turning a human was possible, but complicated. It required permission from the High Council, political approval from multiple court factions, and the mortal's absolute informed consent. The transformation itself was agonizing and not always successful. And even if it worked, Hazel would lose everything about her humanity that he loved: her warmth, her mortality, her fierce determination to build a meaningful life in the brief time she had. "I do not know," he admitted. "Then figure it out. Because this liminal space you are occupying will collapse eventually, and when it does, people will be hurt. Possibly her. Probably you. Certainly the court you swore to protect." Lyric left him with that warning. That night, Mordecai almost told Hazel the truth. They were in her apartment, her roommates both out, sitting close together on her worn couch watching a movie neither was paying attention to. She had her head on his shoulder, her hand resting on his chest where a heartbeat should be. "Can I ask you something weird?" Hazel said during a quiet moment in the film. "Of course. Why do I never see you during the day? Like, we've been dating for 6 weeks and it's always evening or night. Do you have some kind of reverse schedule for work?" Mordecai's body went very still. "Something like that. And you're always so cold and pale, even though you supposedly spend time outside. And sometimes you look at me like you're starving." She shifted to look at him directly, her expression serious. "Marcus, are you okay? Physically, I mean. If you're sick, you can tell me." "I am not sick." "Then what?" Her voice was gentle but insistent. "I like you so much, but I feel like you're hiding something big, and I don't know if it's about me or you or what." This was the moment. Tell her now, face the consequences, stop living in this carefully constructed lie. "There are things about my life that are complicated," Mordecai said carefully. "Things I have not shared because I was not certain how to explain them." "Try," Hazel encouraged. "I'm tougher than I look, and I'd rather know the truth than keep wondering." He opened his mouth to tell her everything: that he was a vampire, a king, a creature 3,000 years old who had been dead longer than her civilization had existed, that he had orchestrated their meetings after that first night, had manipulated circumstances to keep seeing her, that everything she knew about him was filtered through glamour and lies. His phone rang before he could speak. The ringtone was specific, used only for absolute emergencies within the court. Mordecai looked at the screen and saw Lyric's name. He would not call unless something catastrophic had happened. "I need to take this," he said, and heard the regret in his own voice. Hazel nodded, though disappointment flickered across her face. Mordecai stepped into her small kitchen and answered. "What is it?" "The Eastern Court has declared a blood challenge," Lyric said without preamble. "Lord Malachor himself. He is demanding single combat for your territory and title. You have 3 nights to respond or forfeit by absence." The world tilted. A blood challenge was ancient law, the kind of formal duel that had not been invoked in decades. Refusal meant losing everything he had built, surrendering his territory and his throne. Acceptance meant combat to the final death with a vampire lord nearly as old and powerful as himself. "On what grounds?" Mordecai demanded. "Dereliction of duty, compromised authority. They have documented your absences, your distraction, your neglect of court responsibilities. They are arguing you are unfit to rule." Because of Hazel. Because he had chosen his own happiness over his obligations. Because he had allowed himself to love a human woman, and in doing so, given his enemies the opening they needed. "I will be there within the hour," Mordecai said, and ended the call. He returned to the living room where Hazel waited, concern written across her features. "Everything okay?" "I have to leave. Family emergency." "Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," he thought. "Tell me to stay. Tell me that what we have matters more than ancient obligations and vampire politics. Give me a reason to walk away from everything I have been for the chance to be something new." But he could not ask that of her, could not lay that burden on a human woman who did not even know what he truly was. "I will call you," he promised, and kissed her forehead, and left her apartment feeling like he was tearing his own heart out. The Eternal Court was in controlled chaos when he arrived. The vast underground chamber that served as the throne room was filled with court members, advisors, rival faction leaders, and observers from neutral courts. The air hummed with tension and barely suppressed excitement. Lord Malachor stood in the center, a towering figure with the characteristic white hair and crimson eyes of their kind, dressed in formal black that seemed to absorb light. He was Eastern court, ancient and powerful, and he smiled with sharp teeth when Mordecai entered. "King Mordecai," he said, voice carrying through the chamber, "how gracious of you to join us. I was beginning to think you had more pressing engagements with your mortal pet." Anger flared hot in Mordecai's chest. "You will not speak of her." "Struck a nerve, have I? How fascinating to see the great Mordecai Yavalon reduced to this, a king so distracted by human flesh that he forgets his crown, his duties, his very nature." "I forget nothing." Mordecai walked forward until he stood mere feet from his challenger. "You invoke the blood challenge. On what grounds?" "Dereliction of duty, compromised authority, violation of the separation laws that govern our interaction with mortals." Malachor's smile widened. "You have missed council sessions, ignored territorial disputes, and worst of all, you have pursued a mortal woman with the obsession of a newly turned fledgling rather than the dignity of a king. You have made yourself and our entire court vulnerable through your weakness," the assembled vampires murmured, some in agreement, some in concern, all watching to see how their king would respond. Mordecai could feel the weight of centuries pressing down. This was the price of his happiness. This was the consequence of choosing personal desire over duty. "I accept your challenge," he said formally. 3 nights hence, single combat under the old laws. The victor claims territory, title, and authority." "And if you lose, your mortal lives," Malachor added. "That is my term. When I win, I will drain her myself as a lesson about the cost of weakness." The threat was tactical, designed to enrage him, to make him fight recklessly. But hearing Hazel's life used as a bargaining chip in vampire politics made something ancient and violent wake up in Mordecai's chest. "You will not touch her," he said quietly, and his voice carried enough menace that several younger vampires stepped back involuntarily. "Win or lose, you will not go near her. That is my term." "You are in no position to make terms." "I am still king of this court, and I invoke my right to set conditions of combat. You will swear by blood oath to leave Hazel Price unharmed regardless of outcome, or I will not fight you at all, and you can explain to the assembled courts why you were too cowardly to agree." It was a gamble. If Mordecai refused to fight, he lost everything by default, but the insult to Malachor's honor was deliberate and public, impossible to ignore without losing face. Malachor's eyes blazed, but he nodded curtly. "Agreed. I swear by blood oath that the mortal woman will remain unharmed by my hand, regardless of tonight's outcome." The oath was binding, enforced by magic older than their kind. At least Hazel would be safe, even if Mordecai lost everything else. The 3 nights before the combat were the longest of his very long life. Mordecai could not see Hazel, could not risk leading his enemies to her, could not face her knowing he might be walking into his final death. He spent the time preparing, training, strategizing with Lyric about combat approaches. But mostly, he thought about the past few months, about coffee-stained sleeves and late-night confessions, and the way Hazel laughed at her own jokes, about feeling happy for the first time in a millennium, about the terrible, wonderful pain of loving something mortal and fragile and infinitely precious. Hazel texted him repeatedly. First, worried messages about his family emergency, then confused questions about why he was not responding, then hurt silence that cut deeper than any blade. The night before the combat, Mordecai finally called her. "Marcus," she answered on the first ring, her voice thick with emotion. "Where have you been?" I've been so worried. What's going on? I am sorry, he said, and meant it with everything in him. I'm sorry for disappearing. I'm sorry for the confusion. I'm sorry that I have not been honest with you. What are you talking about? Marcus, you're scaring me. There are things about me, about my life, that I have not told you. Things I should have told you from the beginning, but was too selfish and too frightened to admit. Okay, she took a breath. Okay, then tell me now. Whatever it is, we can work through it. I'm not certain we can, but you deserve the truth regardless. He paused, gathered his courage. My real name is not Marcus. It is Mordecai, Mordecai Yavalon, and I am a vampire. Silence stretched across the phone line, broken only by the sound of her breathing. That's not funny, Hazel finally said. It is not meant to be. I am 3,217 years old. I am the king of the eternal court, which governs vampire activity in this region. I do not age, do not die by natural means, and I survive by drinking blood. I am the sad stranger you met in a diner at 3 a.m. because I was lonely and had forgotten what it felt like to want anything beyond survival. This is insane. Vampires aren't real. You're having some kind of breakdown. I wish I were. I wish I could be the normal human man you thought I was. But I am not, and I have lied to you from the beginning because I was selfish, and I wanted to keep seeing you even though I knew it was wrong. The words poured out like confession. I arranged our meetings after that first night. I learned your schedule, your habits, your routines. I manipulated circumstances to keep appearing in your life. Everything you know about me has been filtered through glamour and deception, and I am more sorry than I have words to express. I don't believe this. I don't believe any of this. What is really going on, Marcus or Mordecai or whoever you are? Tomorrow night I will fight a duel for my throne in my territory. If I lose, I will likely die permanently. If I win, I will remain king of a world you can never be fully part of. Either way, what we had is over, because it was built on lies, and I will not insult you with more deception. His voice cracked. But I needed you to know that meeting you was the most important thing to happen to me in 1,000 years. You reminded me what it felt like to be alive. You made me happy when I had forgotten happiness existed, and I am so very sorry that I have hurt you. Stop it. Just stop. Hazel's voice was shaking, angry or scared or both. I don't know what kind of weird commitment-phobic breakdown you're having, but I can't do this. I can't be with someone who disappears for 3 days and then calls with this absolutely unhinged story about being a vampire king. I understand. Do you? Because I really liked you. I was falling for you. And now I don't know what's real and what's not, and I feel like I never knew you at all. You knew the parts of me that mattered, Mordecai said quietly. The sad, lonely parts that needed you. That was all real, even if the details were false. I need to go. I need to process this. I need you to not contact me for a while. Of course. Hazel, whatever happens tomorrow, know that you changed my life. Know that I... He stopped, unable to finish. Don't, she said, voice breaking. Don't say it. Not now. Not like this. The line went dead. Mordecai stood alone in his chambers and felt the centuries settle back onto his shoulders like a familiar weight. He had reached for something beautiful and mortal and alive, and it had slipped through his fingers like water. Perhaps that was always how it was meant to end. Perhaps he had been foolish to think he could hold on to sunlight when he was made of shadows. The blood challenge took place in the ancient chamber beneath the court, a vast circular arena carved from stone and lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Every vampire of significance attended, seated in tiers that rose around the fighting ground. Neutral observers from other courts watched from designated sections. The air was thick with anticipation and barely restrained bloodlust. Mordecai entered the arena in traditional combat attire, simple black clothing that allowed for movement. No armor, no weapons beyond what nature had given him. This would be fought with fang and claw and centuries of accumulated power. Lord Malachor waited in the center, looking confident and eager. Lyric stood at the edge as Mordecai's second, her expression grim. Fight smart, my lord. He is strong but reckless. Use his arrogance against him. If I fall, you lead the court, Mordecai said quietly. You will not fall. If I do, promise me you will watch over her, from a distance without interference. Just make certain she is safe." Lyric's expression softened. "I promise." The Arbiter stepped forward, an ancient vampire whose sole purpose was to oversee blood challenges. "The terms are set. Combat to final death or surrender. The victor claims territory, title, and authority. Begin." Malachor moved first, impossibly fast, a blur of preternatural speed. Mordecai met him midway, and the impact of their collision sent shockwaves through the chamber. They fought like forces of nature, trading blows that would have killed mortals instantly, moving faster than human eyes could track. Mordecai was older, but Malachor was larger and had spent the last century specifically preparing for combat, while Mordecai had grown soft from administration and politics. The fight was brutal and close. They grappled, broke apart, circled each other. Blood flowed from wounds that healed almost instantly. The assembled vampires watched in absolute silence, riveted by the raw display of power. Malachor slammed Mordecai into the stone wall hard enough to crack the rock. "You are weak," he hissed, "distracted by mortal concerns. You have forgotten what we are." "I have not forgotten," Mordecai said, and drove his claws into Malachor's ribs. "I simply decided there might be more to existence than endless violence and political maneuvering." They tumbled across the arena floor, each trying to gain the advantage. Mordecai's body screamed with pain, his healing factor struggling to keep up with the damage. But he fought with something beyond mere survival instinct. He fought because losing meant abandoning the court he had built. Because losing meant proving Malachor right about love being weakness. Because even though Hazel would never speak to him again, he needed to survive so that she could exist in a world where he knew she was alive and well. That thought gave him focus, clarity, purpose. He stopped fighting defensively and went on the attack with calculated aggression. Malachor, expecting desperation, was unprepared for strategy. Mordecai exploited every opening, turned every one of Malachor's attacks against him, used 3,000 years of combat experience to dismantle his opponent piece by piece. The fight turned. The assembled vampires sensed it, leaning forward in their seats. Finally, Mordecai had Malachor pinned, his claws positioned over the other vampire's heart. One thrust, and it would be over. "Yield!" Mordecai commanded. Malachor's eyes blazed with fury and defeat. For a moment, Mordecai thought he would refuse, would force the final death rather than surrender. But survival instinct won out. "I yield," he said through gritted teeth. Mordecai stood, helping his defeated opponent to his feet. "You fought with honor. Leave my territory and we will call this settled." The chamber erupted with voices, some approving, some disappointed at the lack of a final death. The Arbiter stepped forward. "Mordecai Yavalon is upheld as rightful king. The challenge is settled. It was done. He had won. He had kept his throne, his territory, his authority. He felt nothing but empty." That night, against every instinct of self-preservation, Mordecai went to Hazel's apartment. He did not use glamour, did not hide what he was. His skin was corpse-pale in the dim light, his hair white as bone, his eyes carrying the faint red tinge of his kind. The cuts from the battle had healed, but his clothes were torn and blood-stained. He knocked on her door at midnight. Hazel opened it, wearing pajama pants and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back, her face bare and beautiful. She stared at him, her eyes going wide. "You're actually pale, and your hair is white, and your eyes—" She stopped, shook her head. "I thought it was elaborate makeup before, some kind of cosplay or goth aesthetic. But this is your real appearance." "Yes." Mordecai stayed very still, letting her look. "This is what I am, what I have always been. Vampires are real." She said it like she was testing the words, trying to make them make sense. "We are real." "And you're a king?" "I am." Hazel leaned against the doorframe, processing. "The cold skin, the night schedule, the way you sometimes looked at me like you wanted to devour me. I have never wanted to hurt you. You have never been in danger from me." "But you did hurt me." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Not physically, but emotionally. You lied about everything. Your name, your life, your very existence. How am I supposed to trust anything between us when it was all built on deception?" "You are not," Mordecai said simply. "I cannot offer you reasons to trust me. I violated your trust profoundly. I am here not to ask forgiveness, but to give you answers, to let you ask whatever questions you have, to be honest, even though it is far too late. They stood there in her doorway, the space between them feeling vast despite the few feet of actual distance. "Why did you follow me?" Hazel asked. "After that first night in the diner, why not just let me disappear?" "Because you made me feel something other than empty. Because for 4 hours I forgot to be lonely. Because in 3,000 years no one had ever seen my sadness and responded with kindness rather than fear or pity." He met her eyes. "Because I fell in love with you immediately and completely, and I was too selfish to walk away even knowing I should." Hazel made a small sound, half laugh, half sob. "You can't just say that. You can't show up looking like some gothic nightmare prince and tell me you love me and expect it to fix the lies." "I expect nothing. I only wanted you to know the truth, finally and completely." "Are there other vampires? Is this some huge conspiracy?" "There are thousands of us. We have courts and laws and territories. We have existed alongside humanity since the beginning of civilization. We are careful to remain hidden." "And you rule them? Here?" "In this region, yes. I am responsible for maintaining order, enforcing our laws, managing conflicts. It is tedious administrative work punctuated by occasional violence." "Is that what happened to you? The blood on your clothes?" "I fought a duel tonight. For my throne. I won, obviously, or I would not be here." Hazel processed this, her expression cycling through disbelief, fear, confusion, and something else he could not quite read. "This is insane. My entire life has been normal and boring, and now I find out the guy I was falling for is a 3,000-year-old vampire king who rules a secret society of blood drinkers. I understand if you want me to leave. I understand if you never want to see me again. I will respect any boundary you set." "Of course I don't want to never see you again." The words burst out of her, frustrated and raw. "That's the problem. I'm angry at you for lying. I'm freaked out about the vampire thing. I'm processing the fact that mythology is real, and I still want to see you again because apparently I'm an idiot who fell in love with you too." Mordecai's dead heart, which should not have been capable of such reactions, seemed to stutter. "You love me? I really, really don't want to. You lied about your name. You're not even human. You orchestrated our meetings, which is objectively creepy stalker behavior. You have a whole other life I know nothing about." She ran her hands through her hair, agitated. "But yes, I love you, which is why I'm so angry. Because I thought we had something real, and it turns out half of it was manipulation." "The feelings were real," Mordecai said urgently, stepping closer. "Everything I felt, everything I told you about what you meant to me, that was all absolutely real. The circumstances were manipulated, but my heart was not. My heart has not been my own since the moment you sat down across from me and decided I looked like someone who would listen." Hazel looked up at him, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know what a relationship with a vampire king even looks like. I don't know if I can trust you again." "I will earn your trust," Mordecai promised. "However long it takes. I will answer every question honestly. I will give you space when you need it and be present when you allow it. I will never lie to you again, even when the truth is complicated or painful." "What does this mean for us? Assuming there is an us? Do you want to turn me into a vampire? Is that the end game here?" "I want what you want. If you want to remain human, to live your normal lifespan, and build the life you came to this city to create, then I will be part of that life for as long as you allow me. If someday you decided you wanted to become like me, we could explore that option, but it would be entirely your choice made with full information. I will not push you toward either path." "What do you want?" Hazel pressed. "Forget what I want. What do you actually want?" Mordecai took a breath he did not need. "I want to be with you for as long as possible. I want to watch you build your life and support you however I can. I want to introduce you to my world if you are willing to see it. I want to fall asleep beside you, even though I do not sleep, and wake up beside you every evening. I want to know what happens next in your life and share in it." He paused. "And someday, when you have lived the human life you deserve, and if you still want me, I would ask you to consider joining me in immortality. But that is a choice decades away, and I will not influence it. I have manipulated you enough." Hazel studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come inside. You look like you're about to collapse, and we clearly have a lot to talk about." Relief flooded through him. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a chance, a beginning. He followed her into the small apartment, sat on the familiar couch where they had watched movies and talked for hours. She curled into the opposite corner, putting physical distance between them while she processed. They talked through the night. Hazel asked questions about vampire biology, culture, history. Mordecai answered everything honestly, holding nothing back. He told her about the eternal court, about vampire politics and blood laws. He explained the limitations and powers of his kind. He described his own long life, the loneliness that had consumed him, the moment in the diner when she had reminded him what it felt like to want something beyond mere survival. "Show me," Hazel said as dawn approached, "your real face, without the glamour or whatever you use to look human. I want to see what you really look like." Mordecai let the glamour drop completely. His skin became even paler, almost luminescent in the dim light. His hair was pure white, falling around his face in sharp contrast to his deathly complexion. His eyes carried the distinct red tinge of his kind, ancient and inhuman. His features were sharper, more angular, inhumanly beautiful in the way of predators and marble statues. Hazel stared at him. Then, slowly, carefully, she reached across the space between them and touched his face, her warm hand against his cold cheek. "You're beautiful," she said quietly, "terrifying and beautiful, like a fallen angel or a death god. I'm simply old and very tired." "No, you're more than that." She moved closer, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You're powerful and dangerous, and you've lived 1,000 lifetimes. But you're also sad and lonely, and you care so much it scares you. I can see all of it in you." "I'm going to stay with you," Mordecai said, covering her hand with his, "as long as you will have me. I'm going to court you properly, honestly, as an equal. No more manipulation, no more lies, just truth even when it is difficult. I'm still angry at you. You should be. And I'm going to need time to process all of this. Take all the time you need, but I don't want you to leave. Is that stupid? Should I be telling you to leave? I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm deeply biased toward staying." Hazel laughed. A small sound, but genuine. "I guess we're doing this then. Dating, but with full disclosure about the whole Vampire King situation. If you are certain. I'm not certain about anything. But I know I'm not ready to walk away from you, even though part of me thinks I should." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You're going to have to be patient with me while I figure out how to fit this into my understanding of reality." "I will be patient. I have nothing but time." They sat together as the sun rose outside, Hazel warm and alive against his side, Mordecai cold and still and happier than he had been in centuries. It was not perfect. The hurt from his deception would take time to heal. The complications of their different natures would require navigation, but it was real, finally and completely real, and that felt like grace. Over the following weeks, Mordecai introduced Hazel to his world carefully and at her pace. He showed her the entrance to the underground sanctum where the eternal court made its home, though he did not take her deep inside until she asked. He introduced her to Lyric, who regarded Hazel with open skepticism that gradually shifted to cautious respect. "You are either very brave or very foolish," Lyric told Hazel during their first meeting. "My lord has not cared about anything beyond duty in the entire time I have known him. You have changed him fundamentally. I am not certain if that is good or dangerous." "Can it be both?" Hazel asked. Lyric smiled slightly. "Perhaps it can." Hazel attended a court function, a formal gathering where Mordecai introduced her as his consort. The assembled vampires regarded her with curiosity and calculation. Some bowed with respect, recognizing their king's choice. Others looked at her with thinly veiled contempt, seeing only a fragile human who would distract their ruler. Mordecai stayed close, his hand on the small of her back, projecting absolute authority and protection. No one would touch her. No one would threaten her. She was under his protection, which meant she was untouchable by vampire law. "This is overwhelming," Hazel whispered to him during a brief moment of privacy. "Everyone here is beautiful and terrifying, and they all look at me like I'm a temporary curiosity." "You are not temporary," Mordecai said firmly. "You are permanent for as long as you choose to be." They will learn to respect that. What if I want to stay human? What if I live my normal lifespan and die in 60 years? Will you be okay? The question hurt to contemplate, but he answered honestly. I will grieve you for the rest of my existence, but I will also be grateful for whatever time we have. I would rather have 60 years with you than eternity without you. Hazel kissed him then, in front of his entire court, a declaration and a claim. When they pulled apart, she smiled. Ask me again in 60 years. Maybe I'll surprise you. Life found a rhythm. Hazel continued her human existence, her job and friendships and ordinary concerns. Mordecai balanced his court responsibilities with his relationship, learning to integrate the two parts of his life rather than keep them separate. He taught her about vampire culture and history. She taught him about human resilience and joy and the beauty of temporary things. They fought sometimes, usually about the lingering hurt from his initial deception. Hazel needed reassurance that he was being honest. Mordecai struggled with guilt over how their relationship had begun, but they worked through it, learning each other's boundaries and needs, building something strong from a foundation that had started cracked. One evening, 6 months after the blood challenge, Mordecai took Hazel to the train station where she had been heading that first night. They stood on the platform, where she would have boarded if he had not followed her. I have been thinking about that night, Mordecai said, holding her hand, about all the ways it could have gone differently, about how easily I might have let you disappear from my life. But you didn't, Hazel said, squeezing his fingers. You made the choice to follow me, to be selfish and reckless and all the things vampire kings probably aren't supposed to be. I regret the deception. I will always regret that. But I do not regret following you. I do not regret fighting for a chance to be part of your life. Good, she smiled up at him, because I don't regret any of it either. Not the coffee shop meetings, not the lies that turned out to be true in their own way, not the absolutely insane revelation that vampires exist. All of it led us here, and I like where we are. A train pulled into the station, the same line she would have taken. They watched passengers board and depart, lives intersecting briefly before moving apart again. I'm glad you stayed, Mordecai said quietly. I'm glad you gave me a reason to stay. They left the station together, walking into a future neither had planned. Hazel was still human, still mortal, still building her ordinary life in Seattle. Mordecai was still king of the eternal court, still managing vampire politics and ancient obligations. But they had each other, and they had chosen each other with full knowledge and honest hearts. Years passed. Hazel thrived in her life, eventually leaving the tech startup to pursue art restoration, her first love. Mordecai supported her absolutely, using his considerable resources to help her build a career she was passionate about. She traveled for work, and he traveled with her when he could, showing her cities he had known centuries ago through her fresh eyes. They built a home together, a beautifully appointed apartment that bridged both their worlds. One room was set up as her studio, full of light and color and human creativity. Another was Mordecai's study, lined with books centuries old and comfortable in darkness. The question of turning her came up periodically. Each time, Hazel said not yet. She wanted to live her human life fully, experience the ordinary joys and sorrows of mortality. Mordecai never pushed, content to exist in her present rather than rush toward an immortal future. On their 10th anniversary, Hazel brought up the subject herself. They were in the late-night diner, their booth, coffee, and pie between them like that first night. I want to do it, she said. Become like you. Not right now, but soon. Maybe in a few years. I want time to prepare, to say proper goodbyes, to finish some human things. But I want forever with you, Mordecai. However long forever actually is. He took her hand, emotion closing his throat. Are you certain? It is permanent and irreversible. I'm certain. I've had a good human life. I've built a career I love, maintained friendships, experienced the full range of what being mortal offers. But I'm ready for what comes next. I'm ready to be part of your world fully. She smiled. Plus, I'm curious what it's like to be basically invincible and never age. That seems pretty awesome. They made plans carefully. Hazel would continue her human life for 3 more years, enough time to tie up loose ends and prepare emotionally. She told her friends she was moving abroad for work, creating a cover story for her disappearance from human society. She wrote letters to the people she loved, to be delivered years after her transformation when it was safe. The transformation itself, when it finally came, was agonizing but successful. Mordecai stayed with her through every moment of pain, holding her hand, whispering reassurances. When she finally woke 3 days later, with red-tinged eyes and white hair and death-cold skin, the first thing she saw was his face. "Hi," she said, her voice strange and new in her own ears. "Hello, my love," Mordecai replied and kissed her forehead with infinite gentleness. Learning to be a vampire was challenging. Hazel struggled with the bloodlust, with the heightened senses, with the strange timelessness of immortal existence. But Mordecai guided her through it patiently, and Lyric became an unexpected mentor, teaching her combat and court etiquette. Hazel took to immortality with the same fierce determination she had brought to her human life. She became formidable in her own right, not just the king's consort, but a force within the court. She brought fresh perspectives to ancient problems, challenged outdated traditions, and gradually earned respect through competence and courage. 20 years after her transformation, Hazel and Mordecai stood on the balcony of their home, looking out over the city that had witnessed their unlikely love story. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her waist. "Do you ever regret it?" Mordecai asked. "Giving up your human life?" "Sometimes I miss sunlight," Hazel admitted, "and food that actually tastes like something, and the simplicity of a life with a clear endpoint. But regret? No, never. This life with you is exactly what I wanted." "I love you," Mordecai said, words he spoke frequently now after centuries of emotional silence. "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this." "You chose me first," Hazel reminded him, "in a diner at 3 a.m, when I was a disaster of a human pouring her life story out to a stranger. You chose to listen, to follow, to fight for us even when it was complicated. How could I not choose you back?" They stood together in the darkness, two immortal beings who had found each other against impossible odds. The world continued turning below them, humanity carrying on in its brief, beautiful chaos, unaware of the vampire court that existed beneath their city or the king who ruled it. Mordecai had spent 3,000 years learning to survive, to rule, to exist in the gray emptiness between life and death. Then, a stranger with coffee-stained sleeves had sat across from him and reminded him what it meant to be alive. She had told him her whole life over coffee, and in doing so, had given him his own life back. He was no longer lonely. After centuries of isolation, after a millennium of ruling from behind walls of ice, he had finally found warmth, found home. Found the one person in 3,000 years who made eternity feel like a gift instead of a curse. "What are you thinking about?" Hazel asked, looking up at him with eyes that would never age now, that would look at him with love for as long as their immortality lasted. "I am thinking that I was lonely for so long I forgot what it felt like to not be lonely," Mordecai said. "I'm thinking that you saved me from a half-life I did not even realize I was living. I'm thinking that loving you is the bravest thing I have ever done." "Good," Hazel said, smiling with sharp teeth that still looked beautiful to him, "because loving you is the best decision I ever made, even when you were stalking me in coffee shops. I prefer to think of it as persistent courtship." "You were definitely stalking me." "Perhaps a bit." She laughed, the sound carrying out over the city, and kissed him under the stars that had watched him exist for millennia, and now watched him live for the first time in centuries. They had forever ahead of them, forever to explore the world together, to face challenges and political intrigue, to build a life that was theirs alone. Forever to love each other with the intensity of two people who had both chosen each other against all logic and sense. Mordecai Yavalon, king of the eternal court, ancient and powerful and feared by his enemies, held his wife close and felt something he had not experienced in 3,000 years. He felt complete, whole, healed by the impossible gift of a woman who had looked at a sad stranger in a diner and decided he was worth knowing. The loneliness that had defined his existence for centuries was gone, replaced by the warm certainty of being loved and loving in return. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.